Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for what will be the first and hopefully a long line of segments that I like to call Apply That Content, which will be videos based around me tackling certain memes that I find to be done in incredibly bad faith or just utterly grossly disingenuous in their summaries on things related to Star Wars. So on this episode, we'll be discussing this meme that came across my Facebook page because it goes into the comparisons of Luke Skywalker and Rey, trying to divide up the differences of what makes Luke not a Mary Sue type character and Rey, quote, the textbook definition of a Mary Sue. But let's get into it, with the first comparisons being for Luke.
Luke was raised on a farm, mechanical knowledge from working on machines and droids, moderate blaster training, and piloting skills from skyhopping sport.
While with Rey, it states, knows how to take apart out-of-date ships and the approximate value of certain parts, also knows how to whack other equally untrained desert dwellers with a stick. So I feel like this first comparison is to just establish like what their skill sets are in their first respective films. As we progress further, I can already tell you that a lot of this is going to come back to bite the creator of this absurdity in the ass because it's utterly inconsistent with the rest of their logic. Because literally in the next row, it goes with Rey, takes on 3 thugs and comes out completely unscathed.
Oh my god, apparently this dipshit can't count. There are 2 thugs, not 3.
Completely unscathed. Completely unscathed. While with Luke it says, gets ambushed by Tusken Raiders and knocked unconscious and has to be saved. So right away it's already backtracking on Rey's skills because on one hand it acknowledges like, oh yeah, Rey does have fighting skills, but then in the very next row it condemns her for being able to defend herself. So the creator of this meme is both upscaling and downscaling Rey's own accomplishments to fit his narrative, where on one hand he goes, yeah, Rey does know how to fight untrained desert dwellers, but then goes, and can you imagine it? She's able to fight 3 thugs at the same time and win!
Oh my god, apparently this dipshit can't count. There are 2 thugs, not 3.
Man, it must suck when reality doesn't pan out to your narrative, does it? But also, going back over to Luke with the idea that because he gets ambushed and knocked unconscious, it's trying to make the point that because he gets knocked out, that makes Luke less of a Mary Sue type character. Well, you know, in the same movie with Rey, she gets knocked out twice. Don't believe me? I can just play the footage. So if you're trying to make the point that because Luke gets knocked out and needs saving, that makes him less of a Mary Sue type character, Rey gets knocked out twice. Though yes, she does escape in the first sense. When she does get knocked out in the second time by Kylo, Finn is there to defend her because she would need saving as she is unconscious. So far with the point that Luke is less of a Mary Sue because he got knocked out once, Rey got knocked out twice. So we can go ahead and just mark that off as check in Rey's camp for not being as much of a Mary Sue as this meme is trying to portray her as. Then in the third row for Luke it says, hires a trained pilot to take them off-world and receives a small amount of training from a Jedi Master pertaining to relying on the Force when other senses are dull. Then for Rey it says, masterfully pilots, I'm gonna stop you right there. I'm going to go through the rest of this, but it's always super funny to me when I hear someone say, Rey masterfully piloted the Millennium Falcon, and quite literally, whenever I hear that, this is the scene I always see.
Masterfully piloted the Millennium Falcon. Falcon and Rey masterfully piloted the Millennium Falcon. Rey masterfully piloted the Millennium Falcon.
Masterfully! Masterfully pilots a unique cargo vessel and outmaneuvers trained from birth pilots despite having no prior training herself, and learned excellent marksmanship in 10 minutes. So right here is where you can see where the creator of this meme is doing this intentional downscaling of Luke's accomplishments and upscaling Rey's accomplishments to seem far more absurd than Luke's. Because going back to the first line that depicts Rey, it says, knows how to take apart out-of-date ships. So she has experience with out-of-date ships, like the Millennium Falcon. And to say that that's all she knows how to do...
Thanks.
How did you do that?
I don't know.
No
I've
one
learned some
trained-
ships, but I've never
No
left
one-
the planet. You're like... Thanks.
How did you do that?
I don't know.
No
I've
one
learned some
trained-
ships, but I've never
No
left
one-
the planet.
While inferring that Luke has all this knowledge of mechanical stuff, Rey has spent her entire life taking apart ships and finding the valuable parts, which she would need to know what those parts do in order to understand their value. So she would have to have some understanding of the inner workings of a ship. The same way we give Luke credit for having mechanical knowledge because he takes apart and works on droids and machinery. And moderate blaster training. Let's just go there for a second. To say that Rey becomes this excellent marksman in the first 10 minutes while saying Luke only has moderate blaster training. Like the only time we see Luke at the start of his story with a rifle, he never really gets to use it because he gets ambushed. But by the time you get to the Death Star, he is out shooting the trained military of the Empire. So I would say he has far better accuracy and marksmanship than the soldiers of the Empire. The people whose job it is to constantly be shooting at things and would have doubtlessly specific training in shooting at things, while Luke has a far more peaceful life of bullseyeing womp rats with his skyhopper and maybe chasing off a Tusken Raider attack, maybe, but that's never like disclosed to in any kind in the films. But going back to the idea that she is masterfully piloting the Millennium Falcon and outpacing these trained from birth pilots, as if we're supposed to pretend under any circumstance that First Order, Imperial troopers, pilots are anything other than just cannon fodder. Like, it's actually as if they are taking the statement from Obi-Wan seriously, where he's saying like, oh, only Imperial stormtroopers are this precise, yet they can't hit the broadside of a barn. But also keep in mind, if Finn is not in that ship with her, she gets immediately blown out of the sky. Because the first thing she does after skidding the Millennium Falcon through the parking lot is take off straight into the sky, where Finn immediately tells her she needs to stay low because it confuses their tracking. So already she's having outside help while masterfully skidding the Millennium Falcon across half of Jakku in order to outmaneuver these trained from birth pilots. But also keep in mind, if Finn is not in that gunner seat, again, she is blown out of the sky. It doesn't matter if she's able to help him line up that last shot. If he's not in that seat to pull the trigger, she has no one to defend her ship, and she gets blown out of the sky. So while this person is trying to massively upscale the achievement of outdoing some cannon fodder pilots as if they're Anakin level aces, the reality is there's a lot more context to the situation with Rey and her piloting skills than what this person is giving her credit for. Then it goes to the fourth line with Luke, where it says, performs a rescue mission where his team barely escapes with their lives even after being let go. How can they barely escape with their lives if they are intentionally let go? That's literally the plan the Empire had to track down the rebel base on Yavin, because they couldn't get the information from Leia. So when it became apparent that this was a rescue mission for Leia, Vader had a tracker put on their ship. hence why they were allowed to go. So the idea that they escaped barely is just either an outright lie or misremembering the story. Therefore, this whole thing is just false. We're just going to cross that off because that's just patently not true. Then for Rey, it says, used an advanced force mind control technique within 20 minutes of learning the force's existence and escapes on her own. Again, patently false. First of all, let's talk about the force. If you can provide anywhere in any of the movies where it goes into specific detail that any force ability is some advanced technique, by all means provide it in the comments below. But if you have to reach out to exterior content and lore to justify your opinions on things, I'm able to do the same and able to do it far better, because in Lucas's time of ownership of Star Wars, he established in the Clone Wars episode Children of the Force, I believe it was called, where literal babies are performing force levitation of their toys. So it's almost like the force and the abilities that can be used just come down to random happenstance, where a person can use the force and certain abilities seemingly easier than others in certain cases. But to suggest that Rey didn't know the force exists is patently false. Because throughout her story, in the first episode, when she hears the talk about Luke Skywalker, Han, and Leia, at no point does she need anyone to explain to her what the Force is, or who Luke Skywalker is, or Han or Leia, because she exists in a time where the Force and Jedi have returned to the galaxy. They are not guarded secrets out of fear of bringing the ire of the Empire down around people. Luke, in his time, lived a secluded and sheltered life where his family intentionally kept the existence of the Force a secret from him. That is why in his first movie, he has no idea what the Force is. He has to have it explained to him. Rey, in her time, exists knowing the legends of Luke Skywalker, knowing the legends of him becoming a Jedi, and by extension, his use of the Force. She is operating on far more information to go on than Luke had. Luke had an entire lifetime of building mental barriers because he grew up his entire life not even knowing the Force existed. Meaning he had mental barriers set up that blocked his ability to access powers at a faster rate than someone like Rey would, who has grown up knowing about the tales of the Jedi, knowing about the tales of the Force, knowing about the existence of the Force, even if she didn't know at the time she had it. Sure, someone who didn't know they would have the Force would obviously be unnerved and surprised at suddenly finding out about having that connection. That doesn't mean she doesn't know about the Force or its abilities, and nor is that suggested in the story. It's why she immediately goes for trying to use a Force ability, like the Jedi mind trick. She has these legends in her head. Rey in her first movie is supposed to be a reflection of us, people who know the story of Luke Skywalker and his legend. That's why no one at any point has to take her aside and explain to her who Luke Skywalker is or who Han and Leia are. She already knows. And while it's true that she doesn't have any official training in that movie in how to utilize the Force, based on what we see in the movies, where Obi-Wan's only real lessons that he impart on Luke on how to tap into the Force revolve around concentrate, reach out with your feelings, don't trust your eyes, things that are very vague and not exactly detailed. It's safe to say that a person's ability in using the Force comes down to their own mental capacity to believe in themselves enough to accomplish it. That is why when you get to episode 2, when Luke is trying to force lift his X-Wing out of the swamp and fails to do it, and Yoda just does it himself, what does Luke say? I don't believe it. To which Yoda replies, that is why you fail. But, credit where it's due. She apparently learns how to use this ability in 20 minutes. We could also say the exact same thing for Luke in Hoth when he utilizes a brand new Force ability that was never trained to him and he would have no idea of the existence of. Sure, some people could say that maybe Obi-Wan taught him as a Force ghost, but that also sort of defeats the point of why there would even be a necessity for Yoda if Obi-Wan can just teach him everything he knows from a Force ghost. And there's also no information to indicate that Luke has been getting taught by Obi-Wan while he's been dead. Hence why when he sees Obi-Wan's ghost on Hoth, he is confused. Some might call that delirious, but at the same time, if you're in constant contact and fully understand on a regular basis that someone's ghost is basically haunting you, Luke does seem to constantly act surprised whenever he either hears Obi-Wan's voice or even when he sees Obi-Wan in his full ghost form when he's not delirious. So there's literally no evidence to suggest that Obi-Wan has been teaching Luke behind the scenes as a Force ghost. And that would also give credence to why Obi-Wan needed to send Luke to Yoda to be trained by another Jedi Master who was still alive and not a Force ghost. Then you get to the 5th line where it says for Luke, drawing from his previous lesson, is able to slightly rely on the Force to help his shot down a straight trench in the Death Star with protection from others. And before I even get to Rey, we're already once again getting to the creator of this meme downplaying Luke's achievements in this moment. This is not just some slight accomplishment in the Force. It's a 1 in a million shot that is celebrated as such, because he's making an impossible shot using the Force without his targeting system. Something that was already seen as a long shot with its help, that Luke was already struggling with the targeting system. He turns it off and fires it blind. That's a far cry from a slight assistance from the Force. Really, with what this comment says, all it does is actually hurt Luke's case, because if it's in a straight, narrow trench, there's absolutely no reason why a masterfully trained pilot like Darth Vader doesn't just spray and pray and blow Luke out of the sky immediately. Especially when he has 2 TIE fighters on either side, and he gets it down to the point where there's only Luke versus the 3 of them. There's literally nowhere for Luke to go, other than left, right, or up. If Vader just sprays and prays, no targeting system required, the likelihood is he's going to blow Luke out of the sky because there's nowhere for him to go. He goes left, the guy on the left takes the shot. He goes right, the guy on the right takes the shot. He stays in the middle, Vader takes a shot. Or all 3 shoot simultaneously, and Luke has nowhere to go other than up, which would ruin his alignment for making the shot for the Death Star's exhaust port. At which point he'd probably get blown away by the turrets that cover the Death Star. Then for Rey it says, she goes toe-to-toe with a fully trained Jedi turned Sith Lord. Again, I'm gonna stop you right there. Kylo is not a Sith Lord. And you don't get to be upset about something if you don't even understand the accurate details of what you're upset about. And I think this is an important distinction to make, because I think most people have this inherent idea of what is expected of a Sith Lord. There's this inherent level of quality they think that a Sith Lord should represent, that Kylo just doesn't, because he is an emotionally unstable character, and he's also not a Sith Lord. He is what would be known as a Darksider. Now, some might call that me being pedantic, but there's a whole bunch of other things that are going into how Rey beats Kylo in their fight, which I've discussed on multiple occasions, but I'll happily do it here as well. Here are the factors that are going into why Kylo loses against Rey. First and foremost, and we're going to go from the least important to the most important in this regard. First and foremost, he is shot by Chewie's bowcaster, a weapon that we see does immense damage to those it hits. But Kylo just fucking tanks, mind you, and it shows later on bleeding from that wound. Now, I already know there are people that are going to be in the comment section that says, well, that's a good thing for a Darksider or a Sith, because pain is like, it fuels their power. Perhaps. And we do actually see that during his fight with Finn, he is pounding his wound to give himself that energy boost Which, let's be honest, that's fucking badass. But he is still no less bleeding from that wound. He is losing strength through that blood loss. And because Kylo is spending so much time toying with Finn because he's so overconfident in his abilities, it allows Finn the opportunity to land a lucky strike on his dominant arm where he gets sliced. Now keep in mind, we've seen before in the past where Obi-Wan so much as gets nicked on his arm and leg by Dooku in episode 2, and he is utterly disabled. Kylo gets slashed on his dominant arm and he keeps fighting because he's just built different. So far he's been shot, he's been slashed on his dominant arm, and that's all before he gets into his fight with Rey. Now, understanding the context of what is going into his fight with Rey, he wants to capture Rey alive. So far, he's fighting with 3 handicaps, where he's shot, slashed on his dominant arm, and he's also fighting to try and capture Rey, not kill her with a weapon that has the capability of essentially one-shotting a person. He doesn't want to hurt Rey. Meanwhile, he is defending against her attacks, which can be far more reckless, which can be far more dangerous to him, because she's not worried about sparing his life, because he's trying to capture her. And finally, you have the fact of Kylo's imbalance, something that throughout all of Star Wars has been a definitive decider of who will win a lightsaber duel, regardless of a character's skill or physical strength. Going in order, Anakin is a physically stronger and arguably a better sword fighter than Obi-Wan. He's younger, he's stronger, he takes more pride in his combat capabilities than Obi-Wan. By all metrics, Anakin should have beat Obi-Wan on Mustafar, but because of his arrogance and his imbalance due to thinking Padme has betrayed him, he makes the mistake of trying to jump over Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's able to dismember him. We also see at multiple times in their fight that Anakin is just overwhelmingly physically stronger than Obi-Wan. Then you can jump to the original trilogy where Luke fights Vader for the last time, and very clearly Vader doesn't have his heart in it like he had in Cloud City, where he overwhelmingly wiped the floor with Luke. He's more conflicted because he was told by Luke that there's a path back to the light form, there's a path back to being Anakin. And when he's fighting Luke, you can absolutely see his inner conflict where he is not putting himself into the fight as hard. His confidence in himself and in the dark side is in turmoil at this point. All of that can be translated easily to Kylo because of his killing of his father. And it's even reconfirmed in The Last Jedi, where when Kylo says, "I killed Han Solo when the time came, I didn't hesitate," to which Snoke replies, "And it cut your spirit to the bone. You were imbalanced, you were bested by a girl who never held a lightsaber." And then we can go even farther with the imbalance in Rey and Kylo, because we see in The Last Jedi that when they are both equally confident in themselves and in balance with themselves, they are of equal strength in that movie, where they fight over Anakin's lightsaber, and neither of them can really get the edge over each other. Fast forward to The Rise of Skywalker, when they're fighting on the ruins of the Death Star, where they clearly show Rey is in a far more imbalanced state due to her emotions, and Kylo is far more composed. He overwhelmingly beats her in that duel by literally beating her to her knees. Cheap shots do not count, okay? Kylo won that fight. Him getting distracted by his mother's death doesn't count. And then we get to the last one that says, often kicked around and seen as annoying by everyone else. Then for Rey it says, inexplicably loved by everyone for seemingly no reason. The only ones who don't love her are horrible individuals. Well, yeah, because Rey shows people compassion and understanding. She goes out of her way to save Finn when he's being attacked by, I think they're called a Ranthor? The big tentacle blob monster. She saved his life, but I'm positive what they're actually meaning by this, because they don't specifically state it. What they're actually getting on is how Luke, Han, and Leia treat her nicer than Han and Leia treated Luke when they first met in the original trilogy. And there's a very simple reason why. The whole dreaded context coming to rear its ugly head once again. In the original trilogy, Leia and Han are less refined characters. They are far more rugged and in a lot of ways immature. Leia is a young woman leading a rebellion. There is a lot expected of her, meaning she has a short temper, especially when she's being rescued by essentially Cheech and Chong and a talking rug, when she would be probably expecting an elite task force of rebel special ops trying to save her, instead of a pirate, a farm boy, and a bear arguing with each other in this half-assed attempt to try and rescue her. So yes, she's going to be a lot more short-tempered with Luke in that respect. With Han, he is a rugged scoundrel. And it's throughout the course of the original trilogy where we see him become domesticated, where he becomes a more noble man, where he puts himself on the line to save Luke on more and more occasions, even when there's no real benefit to them, when there's no real promise of a reward. He's doing it because he likes Luke, even if he thinks he's annoying, because he looks at Luke like a brother. Family argue with each other. By the time you get to the point with Rey, where she's introduced to Han and Leia, they are far more refined people because they've become parents. They've matured over the events of the original trilogy and into the events of the sequel trilogy. They're adults. And when they meet her, they like Rey because she shows a lot of traits that they found in Luke. Someone who is kind, compassionate, hopeful. Quite literally by stating that, oh, everyone just inexplicably loves Rey, is essentially saying, in the regards to like Leia and Han, essentially saying like, these characters never developed to me over the course of the original trilogy. They should have still treated her like an asshole, because why? Meanwhile with Luke, he does treat her like an annoying pest. So, I mean, there's already that going against you. Yeah, you know? He does come to like her a lot more after he gets out of his funk, but that's no different than how Leia and Han treated Luke throughout the course of the first original movie, when they started off thinking of them as just an annoying pest, and then throughout becoming accustomed to Luke and his hopefulness and his good nature, it works to change them into treating him nicer as the story progresses. Also, just what is wrong with a character being liked by people? Quite honestly, this feels like the situation that you see in like high school and stuff, where you have a friend that just hates the guts of another person, and they can't really explain why. They just hate their guts, and it's like, why do you hate them? They're nice to everyone. They treat people with respect. They're a compassionate person. They're doing a lot of good work for the school, and that friend's just going, I just don't like them. It's because of insecurity, isn't it? And with the final line, it concludes that Luke is basically the anti-Mary Sue, with Rey being the textbook definition of a Mary Sue, even though all context provided either proves the opposite or just negates the issue that this person is either hyperinflating or downplaying simultaneously to make an argument. It's fairly dishonest, and it's a notion that I've said repeatedly on this channel, where if you have to be dishonest to make a point, what point do you think you're making? It's not a good one. Quite honestly, it's comments like this and statements like this and memes like this that get me to adamantly believe that the people who make this stuff make it for viewers that they actively believe are stupid. They are blatantly insulting you to your face by making these kind of talking points, because to them, they know that when you watch these movies, you weren't watching to pay attention, you were watching them, which isn't watching the movie. You're not giving it its fair shake. And if you're only half remembering information and watching YouTube videos to fill in the gaps rather than actually watching the films themselves, I have no reason to respect your opinion. And I will happily, continuously be a voice of advocacy for these films and a defender of these films from bad faith arguments. If you want to make a reasonable argument that actually has logic behind it, clear-cut examples of actual contradictions to the lore, by all means, comment them down below. My boy is calling me. What's up, bitch? Anyway, that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to see more, please give me a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. See ya. Bye.